Yonder Radio, Rural Conversations with National Reach. Thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Jared Iwi. And for you today, of course, trivia. I'm excited about this one. They have let me in on the answer. Oh, and it's solid work. Also, maybe a little less trivial, is the wave of data centers and associated debate that's sweeping the nation. Julia Tilton brings us the latest. We'll have that. And we have our musical guest in Larry and Joe. Amazing music, incredible story. All on the way for you. And now, hailing from the Daily Yonder newsroom, it is the Daily Yonder news editor, Jan Patulski. What is the latest with rural America?
Hi, Jared. This week we're starting with governing and the report about SNAP enrollment dropping in every state in the nation, with Arizona leading the pack with a 42% drop. According to the article, SNAP participation fell between 10 and 12% in 8 other states and 24% in Georgia. In total, about 3.5 million people lost benefits, and according to the reporters, the reason for that is the expansion of eligibility requirements to people formerly exempted. For example, veterans, people experiencing homelessness, or youth who've aged out of foster care system. However, the dwindling number of people receiving those benefits does not match an increase in folks looking for work. So according to the experts, the effects may not match the stated goals.
Then from High Country News about the Continental Divide Trail.
Yes, according to High Country News, the very southern terminus of the long-distance trail is being militarized due to the construction of the border wall. About a year ago, the Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum, transferred over 100,000 acres of federal land from the BLM in New Mexico under the jurisdiction of the U.S. military. What that means practically to folks is not only the disruption of that pristine area, but also a requirement of the hikers to file for permits to even be in that particular piece of the trail. Without the permit, you could be facing federal trespassing charges.
And then AP via NBC News, Meta and rural Kentucky go to the mat.
Yes, according to the report, Meta settled a social media addiction case brought by a rural Kentucky school district. The exact financial details of the settlement were not disclosed. However, the school district wants to use the money to create a 15-year program that will help counteract mental health and learning issues caused by social media. Now, that settlement comes on the heels of other settlements reached earlier with companies such as TikTok, Snapchat, and YouTube, which could mark an interesting turn in the fight between the education system and the social media platforms.
Kids, put down your phones, close your eyes, and listen to the informative sounds of Jan Patulski every week on Yonder Radio. Thanks for coming by.
Thanks so much, Jared.
Well, that was Jan Patulski, news editor of the Daily Yonder, with your weekly headline update. And frequently, we go on deep dives into some Daily Yonder coverage about the efforts to regulate data centers. It's happening across America. Julia Tilton, our intrepid reporter, keeps us updated. And, well, many months ago, Julia Tilton and Alana Newman of the Daily Yonder and Yonder Radio, they did a story in Sangamon County, Illinois. The title, Illinois, is taking a close look at the potential effects of the data center boom. And that title may not have known it at the time, but it's an intense cliffhanger because they've taken the look. What has happened since that, Julia?
So that story came out at the end of March. And since then, Sangamon County board members voted to approve a $500 million data center project on April 7th. And there had been some real discourse in the community and in the county at large over whether or not this scale of development would proceed. But now here in May, the data center is proceeding.
There's such a similarity between the words discourse and discord. Where is this leaning as far as the majority of the community goes? Are they feeling like they're getting what they told they were going to get?
So Ilana and I were just on the ground in Sangamon County, which includes the Illinois state capital of Springfield. We noticed a number of no data center signs placed outside people's homes. We were in Springfield to interview legislators about the Power Act, which is a bill currently working its way through the Illinois State House that would regulate data centers, like the Cyrus One data center that is now being built in Sangamon County. And we also had the opportunity to attend a data center forum hosted by a number of environmental nonprofits in Bloomington. And we heard from community members about their concerns over data center development, what it means for their electricity bills, what it means for their access to water, what it means for the landscape in the communities that they call home.
So the data center has been approved before the potential regulations like the Power Act. And is that a concern that the Power Act, which is an acronym, or acts about water usage are still hung up while the data centers are not?
Yeah, so the Power Act, it stands for Protecting Our Water and Energy Resources. And we had the opportunity to speak with House Majority Leader Robin Gable, who is one of the co-sponsors on the bill. And she has been really spearheading this data center regulation or proposed data center regulation. And one of the key pieces of that regulation, or really the philosophy behind regulating data centers, is to place a floor, not a ceiling, on the regulations. So what that means is that it seeks to regulate things like transparency. So where data centers can come into communities and where they have to disclose information about their proposed developments. Regulates water and energy usage. But the idea, according to House Leader Gable, is that as data centers become more efficient, as they approach developments in different ways in the future, this regulation will still sort of stand the test of time.
Well, Virginia, which, as we know, thanks to Daily Yonder, at least in my case, is the data center capital of the world, they have passed some measures to reduce expenses to consumers. And of course, there's conversation in your article here about data centers paying for or producing the energy they need. In Sangamon County, are they seeing this, as far as a consumer goes, some relief?
Yeah, so what happened in Virginia is that the state approved a new kind of rate class for data centers, meaning that data centers, as ratepayers, so paying their electricity utility bills, will have a different rate structure than residential ratepayers like you and me, for example. Illinois, to my knowledge, has not taken those same steps, but there are provisions in the Power Act that would address some of these concerns around, well, how are data centers being assessed in terms of their energy needs versus how are residents and small businesses and other kinds of developments being assessed for their kinds of energy needs.
There's still a lot that I think will come out in your reporting with union labor, which was discussed in your article, with the Power Act, and probably a litany of other things that will help marry the community with what looks to be a certain future with a $500 million data center.
So the Illinois Times reported in April that the Sangamon County data center will employ 500 people during construction and create more than 100 permanent positions. Now, when Alana and I reported our first story, some of the data center opponents, local residents, and environmental organizers that we spoke with expressed concern that these 100 permanent positions may not actually be positions given to local workers, but that they could, in fact, go to workers who live outside of Sangamon County and may commute in.
It is wild that these data centers, I think in many cases, will be powering AI. And yet, the real I, the real intelligence out here, the humans are learning with each and every one of these community confrontations as to what to request, how to fight it, how to be for it, what it's going to bring, what it lacks, the community can gain. And we got our person right here. Are you happy that you've taken this beat? Are you like, wow, what have I done?
You know, I first came to the energy beat out of a real interest in how energy was and wasn't getting built in rural America and all of the intersecting pieces of that. And that ultimately led me to data centers, which feels like the energy story of this time. And I will say that there's never a dull moment.
Julia Tilton, an avid swimmer, which is great because she's standing in the fire hose of data center controversy and reporting regularly. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jared.
Julia Tilton here on Yonder Radio and her continued efforts to tell the story of data centers, America, and so often rural communities. And now it's time for our outstanding musical guests, a duo that plays so many instruments that they say when they set up on stage, it seems like a massive band is about to perform. But no, it's just the two of them who travel the United States in their minivan, sharing their incredible music and their story. Larry is from Venezuela, and Joe is from North Carolina, and together in their duo, they make music they call Latin grass. Here's Larry and Joe and their amazing story, all on Yonder Radio. One day, your story is going to make one heck of a VH1 behind the music, and I'd start with Larry, and Joe will translate for us here. Larry, you start your professional career at 6 years old, shining shoes and singing, and then you get noticed. Tell us about how did you get noticed as a shoe shiner catapulted your music career?
Bueno, al principio es que cantaba canciones de un grupo muy famoso de la República Colombiana.
So at the beginning, I sang songs by this very famous group from Colombia.
Y mi voz, pues, era bastante dulce y la gente le llamaba mucho la atención como niño.
And my voice was very sweet. And it, since I was a little kid, a sweet little kid's voice caught people's attention.
Y ya a los 11 años, cuando pude llegar a un sitio donde dictaban clases musicales.
And at the age of 11, when I was finally able to get connected with a music teaching entity,
se dieron cuenta inmediatamente porque mi aprendizaje era muy rápido.
Local music educators realized that I was a quick learner.
Y en menos de 6 meses estaba apoyando a mi profesor haciendo clases para los niños, para los demás compañeritos.
And within 6 months of enlisting in that institution, I was able to help my teachers give classes to the other students.
Yeah, at 11 years old, I've read, you were already independent and making a living as a musician, which I know a lot of musicians, and they haven't done that in a lifetime. And then, Joe, you are a multi-instrumentalist, and you're getting some attention, and then during COVID, you find yourself stranded.
I lived in Argentina from 2010 to 2020. My band, Chiapalache, was kind of like working the Buenos Aires underground as a bluegrass band, but then we started using bluegrass instruments to play Latin American folk music, and such was born the concept of Latin grass. This is a band that I started with my students, eventually caught the ear of Bela Fleck, and he produced our second album, Rearranged by Heart, which was nominated for a Grammy. To make a long story very short, this little band that could had this great run in the United States, but then the pandemic shattered the operation. In that period of kind of writing out the pandemic, I met Larry, and Larry is a career musician who talk about having to roll with the punches. He was a middle-class musician in Venezuela, but then his country went to hell in a handbasket, and for his family's safety, they became migrants, applied for asylum in the United States, and wound up in Raleigh, North Carolina. At which point, when he got to my home state, he began working construction. I met this dude, and I was like, oh, so all of a sudden, I'm not the teacher. Rather, I'm back home, and I'm working with a brilliant Latin American who's going to teach me all this new music. It was like a full circle moment for me, so I just I went with it.
Larry, When you moved to America, could you have imagined what you have created today?
No, jamás pasó por mi cabeza.
No, it never crossed my mind that I would be living this.
Era pensar en imposible porque decía, no me van a entender ni lo que canto ni lo que toco.
It seemed impossible because I figured no one was going to understand, neither what I said nor what I played.
Pero cuando conocí a Joe y llegamos a la comunidad hispana y a la comunidad americana.
But when I met Joe and we started playing for both the Latin American community and the non-Latin American community of the United States,
logré sentir que la gente no solo entendía por el idioma del habla, sino por el idioma de la música.
I realized that a lot of people not only understood what I was saying, but also understood my musical language somehow.
Y comenzó la magia de sonar juntos y despertar sentimientos lindos.
And that's when the magic of creating sound together as this duo was born. Despertar sentimientos is to wake up emotions or sentiment in other people. And I think probably a good translation is to touch people's hearts. This is a prime example of how this like cross-cultural bridge stuff works. There's like the idiosyncrasies of each culture are different. So even the translation or interpretation, better put, of each other's way of speaking is like a foray into the Larry and Joe concept. We're between cultures and we're in that in-between space.
Things have changed for people who have been granted asylum, and I'm hoping, A, that you're doing okay, and B, if so, what can you tell people about how?
Bueno, la situación en realidad cambia todos los días.
So the situation changes like every day, to be honest.
Por eso mismo, no hay un enfoque o un pensar directo de cómo nos sentimos porque puede cambiar de hoy a mañana.
So we really can't focus in on how we feel because that could change between today and tomorrow.
Entonces, yo en lo personal decido vivir, no sobrevivir.
So on a personal level, I have decided to live, not to survive.
Well, Larry Bayerin, words to live by is to live. Joe, you and Larry helping people do that across the country, and you can learn more about them at larryandjoe.com. And what is next?
In the summer, we will be all over the Mid-Atlantic. We'll be in the Midwest. We'll be in Colorado, and then we'll be back to the Northeast and New England. And then later in the fall, we're going to be all over the Deep South, the South. All that goes to say is Larry and Joe's going to keep doing what we do, rolling all over the country in a minivan and playing music for you. When we're not on the road, we'll be making another album, having fun, doing what we do, one song at a time.
Well, that was Larry and Joe, the Latin Grass musical duo. They are currently on tour, and you can find out more at larryandjoe.com. Also, for the full version of this interview, head on over to our Yonder Radio YouTube channel. You will hear another Larry and Joe song later on Yonder Radio. Well, it's almost time for a break, but first, we've got some trivia for you. We'll give you 3 clues throughout the show and reveal the answer right at the end. Here's your first clue. The answer to this week's trivia question is a sport that involves a team of competitors. Each team has a total of 6 legs. Intriguing. More trivia coming up. Plus, going on a road trip with some retirees. And before you think that's going to be boring, these are adventurers who bring back what they found as they circumnavigated the largest lake in America. That's coming up on Yonder Radio. Yonder Radio, rural conversations with national reach, and, we're going to go on a road trip here in mere moments. But coming up, Frankie Falagi. I'm not sure if you've heard her on Yonder Radio before, but we love the stories she's finding throughout America. They're fun, they're quirky, and dry farming. Feels like it's a time for that kind of revolution, and we have just the people to share more about it. But right now, we're going to go on a road trip with Tim Marema and Liz McGeachy. They're out of Knoxville, Tennessee. Tim and Liz are partners and travel companions, and they're also a musical duo behind some of the music you hear right here on Yonder Radio. Tim is also the former editor-in-chief, now retired, of the Daily Yonder. He and Liz kicked off that retirement with a big old trip. And this trip sounds amazing because road trips always sound neat as an idea, as a concept, and then you find yourself out on the road and you just want to brush your teeth. But the two of you circumnavigated Lake Superior, and you come back like with Magellans of information. What did you see out there, Tim?
Well, neither of us died, so we have that on Magellan.
Victory.
We were able to brush our teeth most days.
That's good.
We both were retiring and wanted something to kind of catapult us into this new phase of life. And we took our 20-foot camper out for 7 weeks or so. There was this thing called the Circle Tour where you go to the Canadian side of Lake Superior and come back around through Minnesota, Wisconsin, and then the Upper Peninsula. So that's what we decided to do. It's about 2,000 miles of coastline, and we did about 1,200 miles because we didn't go out every little craggy tip of Lake Superior.
But it was beautiful.
Yeah, and then you're confronted with all kinds of different rural.
Yes, and that was the fascinating part to us. I mean, it definitely had that kind of stunning beauty, premier national parks beauty that you would anticipate. And there were small towns and evidence of economic activity and just kind of a diverse spread from kitschy tourism to heavy industrial.
I would say there was a pretty distinct difference between the Canada side and the U.S. side, in that the Canadian side was so open, like you could go for miles and miles and miles of just forest on this 2-lane highway. You get to the U.S. side and it's more fudge shops. I mean, cute towns, but
saltwater taffy.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
On the whole trip, there's this undergirding of industrial America, timber extraction, iron ore mining. Even in a city like Duluth, it's a regional hub for shipping grain from the Midwest.
So you really have two kinds of tourism there. You have the boardwalk activities for some, and then I just want to hide out somewhere for others.
That is true. That is true. And I want to mention too that speaking of industries like iron and scrap metal, that we saw a lot of artistic displays made out of these things. And I mean, I'm particularly, it was called Lake Kennan Land, and it was just out in the middle of nowhere in Michigan, and it was a outdoor sculpture garden. This guy, Tom LeKinnon, had made these outdoor sculptures on his property, and people just stop and look at them. They were really phenomenal. What did you call it? It was like
It was like a sculpture garden that you could tour on an ATV.
Oh, wow. So it's like Mad Max meets Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Because the world will want to know, where should they go based on your recommendations? What were some of your favorite places?
Well, I loved Lake Superior Provincial Park, which is an hour or so north of Sault Ste. Marie on the Canadian side. We were within a stone's throw of the lake. We sat on the beach, wrapped up pretty well, watching the sunset each night at around 10 p.m.
Yeah.
And it was just stunning, peaceful, and that was one of my favorite spots.
In Michigan, in the UP, there were some amazing places like Munising, the Apostle Islands in Wisconsin. We did a kayaking trip up through those islands. Fabulous.
The sea caves of
Sea
sandstone.
caves, yeah. And what was the town we went to where we loved the biking?
I'd shout out to Marquette, Michigan,
Marquette,
which
Michigan.
wonderful art exhibitions on the shore, and a great bike trail system that really made the whole town accessible and beautiful. And they had taken these old iron ore docks and they were like kind of postmodern art now.
Yeah,
they look
that's
almost
right,
like
yeah.
cathedrals.
Yeah.
And there's
yeah.
still one of them working where they take the iron ore and run it up on a train and shoot it down into these huge lake iron ore ships. So there's still the industry, and yet they're wetting it with this aesthetic of taking advantage of what they have, celebrating it, but moving forward.
Well, I know your artist brains as singer-songwriters, as Liz and Tim, who have been around the country performing. What did it tell you about the modern-day rural condition in America? What did you feel?
I'm always struck by the general accessibility and friendliness of people in rural areas. I felt that people were there for a reason, is what it felt like to me. And when that happens, I think I'm kind of a bloom where you're planted sort of guy, and I really resonate with folks who have either remained in a place or chosen a place because it means something to them and they want to build something there. And that was very true on both sides of Lake Superior.
No, I have to agree with that. I found people to be so friendly, and they were finding a way to make it work in these very small rural areas, and it was just a wonderful experience.
Well, Liz, I have to ask you this, because I know if I did this kind of trip, I would want somebody to therapeutically debrief my wife on the situation. But what was it like living with your spouse in a trailer for weeks?
What really makes it work is that you're outside a lot. So there's you don't spend as much time as you think, unless it's raining. But we get along pretty well when we're traveling. So I don't know why we are able to do that, but we can do it.
And the experiences were new. We had each other if we needed something old and comfortable.
Wait a minute.
Something old and comfortable.
All right, we will be right back after these messages and address Tim's injuries. Well, Tim Marema and Liz McGeachy, rumor is you guys have a pretty solid future together. And I think surviving this big journey says a lot. So I'm glad you were able to get back here well and share it.
36 years, and we're halfway there.
One day at a time, as they say.
That was Tim Marema and Liz McGeachy, inspiring us all to hit the road. Their next trip will be a 6-week tour of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. Adopt me, Tim and Liz. But we're not getting off the road yet, people. More road trip with Daily Yonder contributor Claire Carlson as she brings us an ode to the public rest stop, which if you have kids, you know how important these things are. They make road trips possible for everyone, even those with the greatest contradiction, which is a coffee addiction and a weak bladder.
I love a long drive. There's something about hitting the open road with wide open spaces by the chicks blasting through the speakers and a dog panting in the backseat that really just makes me believe in the American dream. Chief among the things that can make or break a good road trip is a rest stop, my favorite form of public infrastructure. Besides libraries, there are few places I can think of where their primary function is to serve everyone who stops in, regardless of income status. Rest stops were created by former President Dwight Eisenhower's Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. This law expanded the interstate system by 41,000 miles and at the time was the largest public works project ever authorized. 2 years later, Eisenhower passed the Highway Act of 1958. The combination of these two acts totally altered the way Americans transport themselves and changed the way they interacted with the communities they traveled through. The rest area was first created to accommodate travelers' needs as they began driving longer distances on America's new highway system, but they've since become one of the few examples of a public space where you can exist without feeling pressured to spend money. Eisenhower's 1950s highway legislation prohibited commercial establishments from operating at public rest stops, with a few exceptions, like vending machines, in order to drive business towards small towns instead of consolidating it all in one stop. I have kind of a whole catalog of favorite rest areas. There's one roughly halfway between the Oregon coast and Portland that I like to stop at every chance I get. A short hiking trail takes you through the forest, and if you visit in the fall, you can watch salmon migrate through the creek that runs through it. Of course, I've also been to less than pleasant rest stops, but at every single one of them, I'm impressed by the government's decision so many years ago to accommodate the biological needs of millions of strangers. The humanity in this decision makes it even sweeter to me. The government said, "Yes, we see your undeniable need to pee, and we will give you a place to do it for free." Can you imagine a world in which each of our human needs were met with the same spirit as the public rest stop?
That was Claire Carlson giving us a new perspective on the wonder of the roadside rest stop. It really is the little things. Simple goodness, people, simple goodness. Thank you, Claire. And now we have another song from Larry and Joe. It's a traditional bluegrass song called Going Back to the Blue Ridge Mountains, and they worked it up in Spanish. And it features Larry on the Venezuelan cuatro and Joe on the bluegrass fiddle. They call it Ya Volveré a la Sierra Blue Ridge, with apologies for my terrible Spanish accent. That's Larry and Joe, folks, right there on Yonder Radio, LarryandJoe.com, Joe. Their story is worth the visit. The music makes it even more so. Well, we got another break coming up, and you know what that means. It's time for more trivia. Here's your second clue. Taking place mainly in the summer, this sport has its own triple crown, with competitions taking place in Fairplay, Leadville, and Buena Vista, all in Colorado. Not sure if you can wager on it yet on Calshi, but I wouldn't doubt it. One thing you can bet on is that, well, We'll be back with more trivia clues and a story that is very pertinent about dry farming. That's coming up on Yonder Radio. Yonder Radio, rural conversations with national reach. Hello, how are you doing? My name is Jared Iwi. I'm your host, and well, it's a good place to be right now. We got Frankie Falegi coming up, and she covers the unusual. It's fun and friendly. She's on the way, and now a hot new trend, or at least a new trend for hot. It's called dry farming, and all the cool kids are doing it. Two of those cool kids are Dr. Gabrielle Roche McNally and Cassandra Waterman. As I was telling you, Gabrielle, I think you're the most relevant person on the planet. Right now, you seem pretty pertinent because you are the executive director of the Dry Farming Institute. Can you explain what this is?
Yeah, and it is fun to hear you say that, Jared. And I, sadly, but perhaps excitedly, there's a lot of interest in water issues. And so I've been telling people I think water is having a moment right now. Perhaps it always should have had a moment because water is life. Water is fundamental to everything we do, including how we grow our food. And so the Dry Farming Institute is a nonprofit. We're based here in Corvallis, Oregon, and we serve farmers in the Northwest. There's a lot of interest in our work with basically just tooling people up on how to grow food with less water. So kind of in its purest form, we can think about dry farming as growing fruits and vegetables without added irrigation. And we actually rely on the water that's stored in the soil to feed the plants throughout the growing season. We also like to talk to people about their water resilience journey. So at the sort of end of a spectrum is dry farming, where we really are growing food throughout a hot summer and actually harvesting tomatoes, melons, cucumbers without added irrigation, right? But then there are folks who are perhaps engaged in a water resilience journey who are limiting their irrigation or reducing it so that they're less reliant on water and choosing varieties that are more drought tolerant and more responsive.
Also with this is the Dry Farming Institute's communication and outreach coordinator, Cassandra Waterman, incredibly named. How did you do with that answer?
Perfect. For us, particularly in Oregon, water is a little bit tricky and it's, from state to state, it's different. So we are working on a water rights system here. So we have folks who have no water rights. So if you're kind of late to acquiring land in whatever capacity, then it's more likely that you'll have less access to water for irrigation because of that. Drought is also just on everybody's minds lately. I have this little dry farming alert on our email and it's like, wow, okay, Virginia is experiencing drought. Kenya is experiencing drought. It's local and global.
Yes. The United Nations just released a report this year about the fact that the planet in general is living through what we call a water bankrupt future. So we not only are sort of facing acute drought and water limitations here in the West, but we're actually planetarily experiencing less water available. We've pumped a lot of that water into irrigation globally, and that water doesn't re-enter sort of the freshwater system, groundwater or freshwater as easily once we've, pumped it out and irrigated.
How does someone practically apply techniques they get from the Dry Farming Institute?
Yeah. A big piece of what we ask people to do is turn the irrigation off. You can't just do that overnight, right? There's a lot you need to put in place to be successful. One piece in particular is we have to think about our soil resources. We have to think about the context that we're growing in. Not everyone can do this successfully depending on where they live and what resources they have. So the underlying soil condition, how healthy is your soil, but also some of for the soil nerds, the parent material and the other sort of soil type you have. So we encourage producers to think about what is their context? What's the climate? What's their soil? Are they a good candidate for dry farming? We can and are aiming to work with folks maybe who aren't the best candidates, but might be able to benefit from improving their soil resources to retain more moisture so that they could go more dry. So they could reduce either maybe a plot on their land that is well suited to not irrigate, a crop like tomatoes. Some tomato varieties are really good for growing in dry farm conditions. We also think about tooling people up in terms of understanding what soil moisture exists. So there's been some work through the Dry Farming Institute and our partners at Oregon State University and their extension program on soil moisture meters and how can you better get data-driven information about actually what's going on with your soil moisture. Oh, actually, if I look at what the soil moistures are telling me, I don't have to water as much.
We don't have a prescriptive practice necessarily. And I think that that's really been foundational for us. Time and time again, when we think that we have it, you know, before we used to say, oh, so we don't recommend growing on sandy soils if you're going to dry farm. And then we have this grower in Poulsbo, Washington, who was like, well, I'm just going to try it. And she added mulch and found that she could do it in her setting. So we're also just really open to what people want to explore with and allowing that to expand our work. We're also not the first people to do this. This type of growing has existed in the Southwest, in the Sahel regions of Africa, throughout the Mediterranean. So we're also using it as an opportunity to learn from different cultures that have been growing in unirrigated settings throughout history.
So this is a safe space for you and your soil nerdism.
Yes, there's definitely a lot of soil nerdism going on. As we noted, like this, for so many reasons, the conversation around dry farming and farming with less water is having a moment, and I don't see, unfortunately, a future for agriculture in the US without a really thoughtful conversation about how we grow food with less water. Partly why I'm here at Dry Farming Institute and why I love this work is it is really hopeful. Like we are strategizing and we actually have something that works.
There's a movement around the flavor of dry farmed produce, right? Like if we get outside of what it means as a grower, as a consumer, a dry farmed tomato, like the flavor is more concentrated. For melon, it's more juicy, which you wouldn't think. It's phenomenal. And there's a bit of a cult following starting to happen. It's exciting and delicious.
Cassandra, I was going to ask you what a more positive way of saying what Gabrielle said in Water Bankrupt Planet. I was wondering if there was a more positive way. And I know we need that reality, so thank you. But I was wondering what the communications outreach coordinator would say. And if you're talking about eating yummy tomatoes made from dry farming, I think you may have nailed it. Thank you so much, both of you, for doing what you do and coming here and letting us help amplify the dry farming revolution.
Thanks, Jared.
Thank you for having us.
You can find more information about this movement on the Dry Farming Collaborative Facebook page and at dryfarming.org. And now we're bringing in Frankie Falegi. We're bringing in a ringer about a phenomenon that is helping older men find community over coffee and, even more importantly, power tools. We are going to wander into a man shed here. This might be something you'd been warned against as a child, but these are good man sheds. Your story here, men's sheds retooling community purpose for older Iowans. So this is out of Iowa. What is a men's shed?
Yes. Okay. Men's sheds. So they started in Australia, actually, in the 90s. So the men's shed slogan is actually shoulder to shoulder because, quote unquote, men don't talk face to face, but shoulder to shoulder. So these men are called shedders. Sometimes they meet up in a real shed. Sometimes they don't. The one the article is about, it's the first men's shed in Iowa. So men will meet like once a week to gather and to build things for the community. Usually 10 to 20 guys get together. They're usually over age 65, and they build things like benches or donation boxes for nonprofits or garden beds or just chat over coffee or visit together.
Yeah, this is good for dudes. As a dude, speaking for dudes, we need things to do to get them in a place with tools and they can make growling noises while contributing to the community. Did you get this sense that this is everything at once that is necessary for the place they are and the people they are?
Harold says yes. Harold Dirks is one of the men that I interviewed for this Cedar Valley, Iowa men's shed. And not surprisingly, there's Harolds in a lot of men's sheds across the Midwest. The Cedar Valley Men's Shed, which is the first in Iowa, was actually started by Dr. Melinda Hines. She's an assistant professor of gerontology at the University of Northern Iowa, which is the study of aging. So she has done a lot of studying around men's sheds. She's traveled across the world to study these and why they're important for older men specifically. Even though the sheds aren't specifically only for older guys, like if you're 20, you can join, but they tend to be, because when these guys lose their jobs, they can tend to lose some of their identity too. So Hines talks about just the unparalleled mental health benefits of connecting, of learning new skills, of teaching others skills that maybe you used in a job, of having routine, of having belonging, and having something meaningful to look forward to every week.
And wait for it, Frankie, shed the stigma.
And to shed the stigma, yes.
That is important. And I loved this part. I loved the entire article, but it turns a little bit because you're like, oh, look at this whimsy. And then you realize this is important for mental health. This is an important space for men to find someone to talk to and to share what's going on in their life.
100%. In a really casual way, like over some wood, over some coffee, over a hammer. Like those are good, cool things for men to be holding while they're having maybe not hard conversations, but really helpful conversations.
And that's the thing, when you are working with someone, yeah, it takes the weight off it. You know, you are focused on some other things, and it is weird. It's just those first few words, but it's because you're in that common space doing that common chore that I guess perhaps it becomes an easier conversation.
Dr. Hines told me at one point, I asked, so are these guys talking about like, hey, how's your mental health today? And she says, of course not, but they are showing up for each other. And when somebody isn't there that week, they'll all kind of get together and grumble and say, maybe we should check in on John. We haven't seen him for a while. We haven't heard from him. Let's, they're obviously caring for each other and building this community together, which is really beautiful.
Frankie Falegi of Arts Midwest and telling the stories like this. So man sheds, are they man spreading?
All over the world. There's more emerging sheds that are popping up in the Midwest. So far, Wisconsin has the lead of 6 men's sheds, and then Michigan, Minnesota, Illinois, and all over the U.S. Dr. Hines is encouraging people to start their own. Hers was really easy. She just put up a poster at the library and said, hey, does anybody want to get together once a week to talk about maybe building things?
Well, Frankie, great story. And we look forward to more, as this is a fantastic opportunity for anyone, wherever they are.
Yeah, find your nearest shed.
That was Frankie Falegi with Arts Midwest. You can find more of her work at artsmidwest.org. And you can look for a men's shed near you, which, by the way, they don't have to literally be sheds. They also can be local arts centers or a library or someone's living room or, a man cave. Learn more at usmensheds.org. Our show is almost over, and if you hear something strange, that's me vibrating with unresolved tension because we have unanswered trivia still looming over us. But it's finally time for the last clue. And then, at last, our answer. Here's the last clue. Legend has it this sport originated when 2 miners found gold at the same time and then raced back to the claims office with some help from their equine partners. Are you ready for the answer? The answer is burro racing. Officially a heritage sport of Colorado, pack burro racing involves 1 human athlete and 1 burro or donkey racing as a team on different courses throughout the Mountain West. The first formal event took place in 1949 when 21 teams raced over a mountain pass from Leadville to Fairplay, Colorado. Nowadays, pack burro races are also popular in New Mexico, Arizona, California, Idaho, with courses ranging from 5 kilometers to 30-mile ultramarathons. The racers must lead their burros, not ride them, while the burros carry packs of equipment. In a nod to the sport's origins, the packs must include a prospector toolkit, including a pickaxe, a shovel, and a gold pan. All things that you don't need with Yonder Radio, as we just regularly deliver treasure right to your ears, and we greatly appreciate you being here for it. And you can confirm or deny whether or not it actually is treasure by emailing us your feedback, info@yonderradio.com. Let us know what you think as we totter into the air around you. What can we do better? Let us know. info@yonderradio.com. And thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to Yonder Radio, a production of the Center for Rural Strategies, publisher of the Daily Yonder. I'm your host, Jared Ewey. The Living Tradition segment was produced by Nicole Musgrave. Thanks to Don Castle and the Tennessee Sheiks, Steph Gunno, and the Lone Tones Quincy Ponfair, Leo Posel, and Tim Marema for the great music. Our editor and producer is Susanna Brown. This episode was also produced by Anya Patron-Slepian with additional support from Alana Newman and Julia Tilton. Our executive producer is Joel Cohen. The executive in charge of production is Adam Georgie. Yonder Radio, rural conversations with national reach.